There's something nobody in the burnout space talks about, not because it isn't real. Because most burnout content is built for people who haven't stopped yet. It's built for the person still running the loop, still hitting deliverables on fumes, still performing energy they don't have, still trying to find the exit. But some people have found the exit, or some version of it. They slowed down, they changed something real, they stopped performing, or came close enough to feel the difference. And what they found on the other side was not what they expected. It was quieter than they expected. And emptier. And a little bit frightening. And they don't have a name for that either. This video is for that person, not the person who needs to stop. The person who stopped and is now standing in the silence wondering what exactly they are supposed to do with it. By the end of this, that silence will have a name. And a shape. And something you can actually do inside it. Not as a performance, not as the next phase of optimization, but as the real work that only becomes possible once the other work is done. Here's what the burnout content ecosystem gets wrong. It treats recovery as a destination, as the thing on the other side of the exhaustion, as if stopping the performance is the final act. And once you've done it, clarity arrives, presence returns, and you become the person you were supposed to be all along. That's not what happens. What actually happens, and what almost nobody prepares you for, is that the stopping creates a vacuum. The schedule clears. The pressure drops. The output slows down. And where all of that used to be, there is now a specific kind of quiet that is not peaceful. It is disorienting. Researchers who study identity disruption after major life transitions call this a period of identity moratorium, a suspension between who you were and who you're becoming, where the old structures no longer hold and the new ones haven't arrived yet. It's documented. It has a mechanism. It is not a sign that something went wrong. But here's the part that makes it especially hard for people who came from high-achieving identities. You spent years building a self around certainty, around output you could point to, around a version of competence that produced legible results. And then you cleared the desk, and the clearing was the right thing to do. And now you're standing in front of a cleared desk with no idea what to put on it. That emptiness is not absence. That's the first thing to understand clearly. It is the specific feeling of an identity that has not yet been built. Not lost, not gone, not broken, not yet. There's a story most people carry into the post-burnout stage without realizing it. It goes something like, if I can just get back to who I was before all of this, before the drive took over, before the identity fused with the output, before the performance became the whole thing, then I'll know who I am. That story is understandable. And it is not going to help you. Because the version of you that existed before the performance cannot be returned to. Not because it's gone, but because that version was also becoming. They didn't have the finished self figured out either. They were just earlier in the process. The work of this stage is not excavation. It is not about digging down to find the real self that was buried under the ambition. The work is construction. And those are not the same thing at all. Excavation assumes something complete is already there. Waiting, intact, fully formed. And that the only task is to remove what's covering it. Construction assumes that what you're building has never existed in this form before, that it requires material and time and deliberate attention, and that not knowing what it looks like yet is not a failure of the process. It is the process. Here's what makes this hard specifically for this audience. High-achieving people are trained to know what they're doing before they do it, to have the framework, to understand the metric, to work from a plan that produces a measurable outcome. And the construction of a self after the performance collapses does not work that way. It is slow, it is nonlinear. It produces no legible output for long stretches. And the discomfort of that, the specific discomfort of doing important work that cannot be measured, feels, to a person trained on metrics, like doing nothing. It is not doing nothing. It is the hardest thing you've been asked to do in a life full of hard things. Because it cannot be optimized, it can only be inhabited. And the fact that you don't have a framework for it is not evidence that you're doing it wrong. It is evidence that you finally reached the part of the work that no framework covers. So what does construction actually look like? Not as a program, not as a list, but as an honest account of what is actually available in this stage of the work. The emptiness you feel after the performance stops is not a symptom of failure. It is the sound of the old architecture coming down. When a building is demolished, the silence that follows isn't peaceful immediately. It's unsettling. There's dust. There's a gap in the skyline where something used to be. That's exactly where you are. And that gap, that specific uncomfortable gap, is the only place the new thing can be built. Here is what is actually available in this stage. The first is preference. Not preference as a productivity tool. Not, what do I want to do today in order to feel accomplished? Preference as data about who you actually are. When you are not performing for anyone, when there is no output to justify, when no one is watching the metric, what draws your attention? What do you find yourself returning to when nothing requires it? These are not small questions. They are the raw material of the self you are building, and they only become audible when the performance noise has died down enough to hear them. Most people in recovery rush past this. They fill the silence with the next productive thing, even if the productive thing is now journaling or meditating instead of quarterly reports. Same architecture. Different furniture. The invitation here is to not fill it, to let the preference surface without immediately making it useful. The second is instinct. Burnout, at its most fundamental, is the experience of having overridden your instincts for so long and so thoroughly that you stopped being able to hear them. The tiredness was there early. The signal that something was wrong arrived years before the collapse. But the system was good at suppressing the signal, good at reframing the dread as ambition, good at turning the fatigue into a scheduling problem. In the construction phase, the instincts begin to come back online. Slowly, unevenly, sometimes in ways that don't make sense. You might find that you deeply do not want to do something you've been telling yourself you want for years. You might find that something you dismissed as trivial produces a quiet, specific kind of ease you haven't felt in a long time. Pay attention to that, not because it's the answer, because it's information. And you are learning, for the first time in a long time, to trust the information that comes from inside you rather than from the metric. The third, and the hardest, is tolerance for unfinished. The self being built in this stage will not be finished for a long time. It will not be presentable for a long time. It will not be explainable at dinner parties for a long time. And for people who built their identity on legibility, on being someone others could understand and measure and admire, that illegibility is its own specific grief. But here is what's true about construction that demolition isn't. It accumulates. Every day that you choose preference over performance, even slightly, even imperfectly, is a day a small piece of the new structure goes up. You won't see it. Not yet. But it's there. The person you're becoming is being built out of exactly these moments. The quiet choices, the instincts you follow when no one's watching, the things you finally stop explaining. That is not nothing. That is actually everything. You are not lost. You are under construction. And those are not the same thing. If you're in this stage, if the performance has slowed, and what you're looking for now is not more explanation, but a container for the work, there's a resource in the description built exactly for this moment. 90 days of daily prompts designed specifically for people already in recovery. Not to produce anything, not to optimize anything, but to give the construction process a place to happen. Not another thing to do. A structure for what you're already doing. So what does this actually look like in a life that still has a mortgage, still has obligations, still has people who depend on the output, because that's the real constraint. And any answer that doesn't live inside that constraint isn't an answer. The construction doesn't require you to disappear. It doesn't require a sabbatical or a retreat or a dramatic exit. It requires something quieter and more sustainable than that. It requires finding, inside the life you already have, small territories of non-performance. Not hours. Sometimes minutes. Not transformation. Sometimes just a Tuesday evening where you did something because you wanted to and not because it produced anything. That is not a consolation prize. That is where the construction actually happens. In the accumulated weight of small, genuine choices made inside a real life with real constraints. Here is the objection that surfaces at exactly this point. Maybe the performing was who I actually was. Maybe I dismantled something real and what I'm calling the performance was just me. What if there's nothing underneath it? That thought is worth taking seriously. Not because it's true, but because the fear underneath it is real. And the fear deserves a real answer. Here's the real answer. The performance was real. The drive was real. The achievement was real. None of that is being invalidated here, but the self that performed all of that was a self with more dimensions than the performance revealed. Not a different self, a fuller one. The exhaustion was one of those dimensions. The grief is one of those dimensions. The disorientation you're standing in right now is one of those dimensions. You were never only the output. You were just only allowed to show the output. And what comes after burnout, the part nobody talks about, is the slow, non-linear, unglamorous, genuinely important work of becoming legible to yourself again. Not impressive, not optimized, not finished. Legible, that's a different standard. And it's the right one for this stage. Because the life you're building now is not for an audience. It's for the person who has to live inside it. And that person, the one who has been very quiet for a long time, they already know what they need. They've known for a while, they just haven't been asked. Ask them. Not once, regularly, not in a journal that gets abandoned after 11 days. In the sustained, patient, low-pressure practice of actually listening to yourself over a long enough period of time that the answer can take its real shape. The construction takes time. More time than the performance culture trained you to give anything. But the thing being built is yours, in a way that nothing you built on someone else's definition of worth has ever been. That's what's available here, that's what comes after. If what this video opened is something you want to go further into, the 90-day journal in the description is built for exactly this stage, not to produce an outcome. To hold the process, link in the description and pinned comment. What has surprised you most about the stage after the stopping? The thing you expected to feel, and what you actually found instead. So here's where this leaves you. You came to this video from a specific place, the place after the collapse, after the slowing, after enough of the performance has dropped away that the silence has become undeniable. And the silence felt like a problem, like something had gone wrong in the recovery, like maybe you'd traded one kind of lost for another. It hadn't. The silence is not the absence of yourself. It is the condition under which yourself can finally be heard. You cannot hear something quiet over something loud. And for a very long time, the performance was loud enough to drown everything else out. What comes after burnout that nobody talks about is not a destination. It's not a return. It's not the person you were before, reassembled and waiting on the other side. It's something that has never existed yet. A self built out of what you actually want, what actually produces ease, what you choose when no one is measuring the choice. That self is not finished. It won't be finished for a while. And the unfinished state is not failure. It is the honest and necessary state of something real being built instead of something performed being maintained. There's a question worth carrying into this week. Not to answer immediately, maybe just to hold and see what surfaces. When you imagine the person you're becoming, not the most impressive version, not the most recovered version, not the version that would satisfy the people who knew you when the performance was everything, but the version that feels most like you, what do they spend their time on? What do they not bother to justify? What do they let themselves want without making it useful first? That version of you is not theoretical. They're not waiting on the other side of some transformation. They're already present in the small, genuine choices you're already making. In the quiet, in the non-performance, in the disoriented and unglamorous and genuinely important work of this exact stage. The self on the other side of the performance is not something you find. It's something you build. And you've already started.